Greetings! This video will assess the outcome of a potential conflict between South Korea and Japan. While both countries have been effective protectorates of the United States for 75 years, relations between the two have often been antagonistic. Due to the geographical separation of the two countries, a conflict will primarily be centered on air and naval engagements. Assessing Japanese air power, the Japanese Air Force fields two primary classes of combat jet. The bulk of the Japanese fleet is comprised of F-15J Eagle heavyweight air superiority fighters, a derivative of the US Air Force's prime Cold War fighter, the F-15C Eagle. Japan also deploys the lighter single-engine F-2, a derivative of the American F-16 Fighting Falcon. The fighter is much more capable and expensive than the standard F-16, with a powerful AESA radar, a more maneuverable and higher composite airframe, and state-of-the-art avionics and electronic warfare systems. These two fighters are highly complementary, much like the American F-15 and F-16 were designed to be. Japan's other two classes of fighter, which are only partially in service, include the F-4EJ Phantom third-generation fighter, a jet with limited maneuverability and sensors, but a high speed and altitude, and the F-35A stealth fighter. The F-4 is scheduled for retirement in the near future, while the F-35 is very far from ready for high-intensity combat and will not be for some years. South Korea's fighter fleet is more diverse, with 6 classes of combat jet in service. The F-16C forms the bulk of the Korean fleet and represents a versatile but lightweight 4th-generation multi-role platform, which has undergone regular domestic upgrades. The F-16 is not a below-average performer in any respect, but is also far from outstanding in its capabilities. South Korea's most capable fighter jet is the F-15K SLAM Eagle. Unlike Japanese F-15s, these are designed primarily for a strike role rather than air-to-air combat. They are considerably more modern and boast greater endurance, more powerful sensors, and superior electronics. South Korea also relies on 10 squadrons of older third-generation fighter jets. The lighter of these, and the country's most widely deployed fighter, is the F-5E Tiger II, a very light but versatile design prized for its low maintenance needs and high sortie rate. South Korea also deploys the third-generation F-4E Phantom in large numbers, which have been modernized domestically and deploy a wide range of standoff missiles. Like the F-15 and F-16, the F-4 and F-5 also form a complementary heavy-light combination and represent analogues to the newer fighters from the previous generation. South Korea further deploys the very light F-A-50 Fighting Eagles, which combine modern avionics and composite materials with a lightweight and very low operational cost. These jets have very limited capabilities for high-intensity conflict. Like Japan, South Korea deploys the F-35A 5th-generation fighter in limited numbers, but again these are still very far from ready for high-intensity conflict. Comparing both fleets, it is evident that modern 4th-generation fighters make up a far greater proportion of the Japanese fleet, thus a far higher proportion of South Korean fighters will not be able to seriously contribute to high-end air-to-air operations. Japan's fighters are also on average much heavier, with one of the highest proportions of heavyweight fighters in its fleet in the world, which provides several key advantages. Looking at the composition of the two fleets, the number of 4th-generation fighters in service is almost exactly the same. While South Korea has a considerable numerical advantage of counting its F-A-50s and 3rd-generation fighters, their effect on early clashes for air superiority will be minimal. None of these jets are equipped with modern air-to-air missiles. Comparing both countries' main frontline fighters, the Japanese F-15J and South Korean F-16C, the Japanese fighter can carry a heavier radar, more weapons, flies much higher and faster, maneuvers better, and has superior endurance. If operating the same missiles, faster and higher flying F-15 fighters will be more dangerous and will be able to reach targets further away, as the missiles will gain more energy from the aircraft. This will again benefit Japan, which fields a far higher proportion of F-15s in its fleet. The fast and high-flying F-15s will be much more survivable, as missiles will need to expend much more energy to reach them. This will improve survivability against both high and low altitude threats, as well as against enemy air defenses. Not only does the F-15 have 100% more thrust from its engines, but its radar is much heavier and more powerful, providing greater situational awareness than the F-16's light radar can. These advantages between them make the F-15 a far more dangerous fighter in air-to-air combat. The Japanese F-2 also enjoys significant advantages in maneuverability and situational awareness over South Korea's F-16. Thus, the F-16 will face a significant disadvantage against both Japanese fighter classes. South Korea arguably does field the most capable fighter between the two countries. The F-15K SLAM Eagle jets are much newer and more versatile than the Japanese Eagles, and have superior sensors and electronics. While Korean F-15s are superior, they are outnumbered more than 3 to 1 by their Japanese counterparts, meaning their ability to turn the tide of an air war is limited. Japan's situational awareness advantage from superior sensors on its fighters is complemented by one of the world's largest AWACS fleets, which provides very high coverage. South Korea's AWACS fleet, though formidable, is far more modest. Despite Japan's considerable strength, South Korea retains a number of advantages of its own. South Korean jets are on average newer and receive more regular upgrades, which provides considerable advantages, particularly in the field of electronic warfare. Perhaps most critically, however, modern South Korean fighters all deploy AIM-120C air-to-air missiles. Less than half of Japan's F-15s have actually been equipped with modern missiles, and the majority use the aging AIM-7 Sparrow. This alone can arguably compensate for the F-15's advantages in flight performance. The AIM-7 has a much poorer flight performance, a much shorter range, and outdated electronic warfare countermeasures, limiting its ability to threaten modern Korean fighters. The AIM-120's speed and range advantages over the AIM-7 are also very considerable, and mean Japanese F-15s could struggle to target Korean jets without first being subjected to multiple attacks. The AIM-120 is an active radar-guided missile, meaning after the launching fighter obtains a lock on a target and fires the missile, it is able to guide itself to the target, leaving the fighter free to lock onto other targets. The AIM-7 lacks this capability, requiring a constant radar lock from the aircraft which fired it. Should this aircraft break lock or be destroyed, the missile will cease to function. The AIM-7 today is an effectively obsolete missile, and with so many Japanese frontline fighters relying on it, it will give South Korean jets a massive advantage in long-range engagements. This advantage would only be greater for the more elite F-15Ks, allowing them to dominate Japanese Eagles in the sky. To assess the outcome of an air war, it is also important to consider the air defense and strike capabilities of both countries. Japan's air defense network is primarily comprised of American MIM-104 Patriot and MIM-23 Hawk batteries, both somewhat limited in their performances. It also deploys the indigenous Chu-SAM, a more modern analog to the Hawk. South Korea deploys a similar combination of Patriots and Hawks. Although it has less Patriots, it has a much smaller territory to cover. These are complemented by the KM-SAM medium-range system, which uses an advanced cold launch system and incorporates Russian air defense technologies. The Patriot system is heavily relied on by both countries, but has a very questionable performance. A key weakness is its lack of a cold launch system, meaning that unlike platforms such as the Russian S-300 series or North Korean Pyongyang-5, the Patriot can only engage targets within a certain arc of fire, leaving it vulnerable to strikes from other directions. The Patriot also suffers from a very poor combat record, as widely reported by many major US media outlets. Detailed studies published by International Security and the New York Times, among others shown here, show highly questionable results against very primitive 1960s missile systems used by Iraq and Yemen. These systems could well be near useless against any remotely modern form of missile attacks. Combined with its limited mobility, its ability to engage just 9 targets simultaneously, and the relatively low speed of its interceptors, which rules out striking faster missiles, the Patriot batteries defending both countries are quite underwhelming. While land-based air defenses are comparable, South Korea has a massive advantage in strike capabilities, putting it in a much stronger position to neutralize Japanese air bases and logistics in a war's opening stages. South Korean fighters can deploy 4 major classes of advanced standoff missile. The AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missile works by homing in on radar emissions and is specialized in softening enemy air defenses. The AGM-84H carries a larger payload and has a longer range, allowing it to threaten air bases, logistic hubs, and other targets. The most dangerous standoff missile in the Korean arsenal is the KE-PD-350 Taurus, which carries a very large warhead, flies supersonically, and has a very long engagement range. The missile is extremely precise and carries a penetrative warhead, allowing it to neutralize heavily fortified targets such as bunkers. South Korean F-15s also deploy the AGM-130, which, though shorter ranged and subsonic, deploy huge warheads over 900 kilograms. South Korea also retains a massive advantage in ground-based ballistic missile capabilities. The Hyunmoo-2 design is thought to be derived from the Russian Iskander. The B variant carries a heavy warhead and can cover much of southern Japan, while the C variant with a smaller warhead can strike the majority of the mainland, including targets in major cities such as Nagoya and Osaka. The missiles are hypersonic, highly maneuverable, and follow complex trajectories, which makes them almost impossible to intercept. The Hyunmoo-3, a ground-based cruise missile, retains a longer range of up to 1,500 kilometers, but is slower and more prone to interception. South Korea also deploys the MGM-140 ballistic missile, but its very short range limits its viability against Japan. Japan does not deploy any cruise or ballistic missiles capable of striking South Korean targets. Although some F-2 fighters integrate targeting pods, these can only be used to launch guided bombs. South Korea's massive strike capabilities and Japan's lack of them are likely to be a major game changer, allowing the Koreans to cripple the Japanese war effort while the Korean mainland will remain relatively safe from harm. Such strikes could quickly take Japan's air bases and most of its fleet out of action, while Korean bases would remain operational. This would almost guarantee Korean air superiority. While Japan may be able to reconstruct some airfields and other facilities, there is nothing to deter further South Korean strikes to destroy them. Korean attacks will be continuous. Looking at naval assets, while Japan has one of the world's largest destroyer fleets, it will not be sufficient to reverse the trend towards a South Korean advantage. Japanese destroyers do not have an analog to the American Tomahawk cruise missile for strikes on ground targets, and the fleet is overwhelmingly oriented towards an anti-submarine warfare role first and air defense second. Japanese destroyers deploy SM-2 and SM-3 surface-to-air missiles. The SM-3 will be of little use against South Korean missiles and is designed to engage much longer-ranged missiles at extreme altitudes. The SM-2 can potentially blunt South Korean missile attacks, although for most targets at least 3 interceptors will be needed for a successful hit. The system's ability to intercept higher-end Korean missiles remains questionable, however, and Korea's hypersonic ballistic missiles will be able to reliably evade these defenses. Hyunmoo-2 missiles can pose a serious threat to Japanese destroyers themselves. This may prevent them from operating in an air defense role between the two countries. South Korean destroyers also rely on the SM-2, but deploy large numbers of Hyunmoo-3 cruise missiles, almost 50 each for the Sejong the Great-class ships, allowing them to contribute to precision strikes against Japanese targets. South Korea's destroyers between them can deploy almost 300 Hyunmoo-3 cruise missiles. The extreme range of these missiles allows South Korean destroyers to strike Japan from a safe distance. Ultimately, neither country's armed forces are heavily oriented towards offense, and no matter the outcome of an air war, neither country can or will attempt a ground attack. This is beneficial for Japan, as South Korea's primary field of superiority over it is in its ground forces. The very low likelihood of a ground war has led Japanese defense planners to place a low priority on such capabilities. South Korean infantry, tanks, and artillery are overwhelmingly more powerful than their Japanese counterparts. Japan's very limited ability to threaten Korean territory, in contrast to South Korea's massive strike capabilities, means the outcome of a conflict will most likely be a South Korean victory. With air bases, supply hubs, command centers, and other vital targets across Japan coming under constant bombardment, Japan's fighting capacity can quickly be eroded. This, combined with more modern, larger, and better armed air force, plays into South Korea's hands.